So, hello there. Long time no see. We haven't done one of these for a while. So this is just a short quickie just to make sure that everything is still connected and oops. So this is just a turn that off. Right, yes, so we haven't done one of these in a while. Got to keep the machine, the wheels all greased up. But today, just going to have a look at IMVU Studio Toolkit. Going to have a look at making some poses. So there is, it's not a bug per se, but let's just explain this. So ordinarily you are encouraged to use Blender 2.93 LTS. That's the long-term support version of Blender because it's stable. In other words, the foundation isn't going to be introducing any more features or shenanigans to it, and they're just basically fixing things that may go a bit wonky. For IMVU, that's advantageous because it means that we're not having to fight with the application and the constant updates that it's prone to. The upshot for that with use the menus as much as possible so that we can see. So sidebar, that's the N key. So that toggles N, toggles the sidebar, which is where the toolkit lives. So if you haven't used or haven't installed the toolkit, you will need to go to hold on a second. So drop this in chat and this in chat. Is that gone at Twitch? Yeah. Oh, it has gone out to YouTube. Oh, they must have fixed that. It hasn't gone out to Twitch. Where is it? All right, yeah, so they fixed that. Oh, you couldn't do that before. Anyway, so go to that page, have a read through. It'll show you how to install the toolkit, and it's pretty straightforward. You are essentially just loading in a zip file into into Blender's preferences. So edit, preferences, and you'll get the preferences window pop up. And we just go into the add-ons section, click on install, and it'll give us the usual browse to dialog. Select the zip file that you've downloaded from IMVU, and then just click the install add-on, and it will install the files. It will automatically do everything for you, so you don't need to unzip the file or do anything with it. Just download the file, save it to your desktop or wherever it's going to be saved to, and then just install it. And then once you've done that, when you're actually using the toolkit, you do not need to do anything else to the scene, so leave this alone. It just needs to be File, New, General, and a clean scene. That just ensures that when the tool is doing its thing, it loads in the bits that are needed properly or cleanly. So once we've got all that sorted out, so view, sidebar, that's the sidebar, and we want this panel that'll now be available. So we just click on that and we get all the tools that we've got available to us. So there's the room tool, furniture tool, attachment tool, that's your accessories, clothing tool, animation tool, and the export tool. The one we're going to use is just take a look at the animation tool to make some poses. So click on that to expose the options, and all we need to do to start is click on append animation file. Click that and it'll drop in the avatar, female avatar in this case, with all this stuff on it. But As we were saying, or trying to explain, if we are using Blender 2.93 LTS, when we use this, the pose file, in this version of Blender, we get this problem where the avatar's arms are sticking out instead of being down by the side of the avatar. And that's a bug that's, well, it's a backward compatibility bug. So if you're going to be using the toolkit now, it's best, let's close that, don't save. It's best just to download the latest version, Blender 2.31. So download that, go through the same process again, just install it, edit, preferences, and then click on add-ons and then install. Turn that off. Don't want to get copyright strikes. And install, and that's it. Same thing, same setup, and then we'll get the sidebar and the tool, and then animation tool. Same again. Make sure we're starting from clean scene, append animation file. But this time the avatar's arms are in the correct position, down by the side of the avatar. So that's a compatibility issue. So if you're using Blender and you find that the avatar's arms are sticking out, you're using the wrong file. Not wrong file, you're using the wrong version of Blender. So what do we have? We have the avatar. It's the female, but the male version is just as applicable because they use the same skeleton. So what we have, instead of the avatar skeleton, let's just open another instance of Blender. So we used to have to use, go on, resize. We used to have to use, let's just use that, open. This is what we used to see when we were creating poses using the starter files. And it basically does the same thing, but with the toolkit, we get these little control elements, and they control different aspects of the avatar. So if we select the foot, press the G key, and move that, it controls the entire leg. And this trumpet shape controls, press G again, that controls the position of the knee. So all these little control points do something with respect to the avatar. And the overall thing, so all these shapes, is a rig. We can use these to do all sorts of things. But the one that we don't want to use or don't want to move is this one at the bottom. This is the root element of the rig, and that's relative to the origin of the avatar. So that should always stay fixed. Don't want to move that. So if the avatar needs to move, we have to think of a different way of doing that by moving what is pelvis node. So we move this one instead and change the other elements of the skeleton or the rig relative to this bone or this control element. So that's how we control or pose the avatar using these shapes, which control different aspects of the avatar. So the hand, and then we've got the fingers. The fingers are not a chain of bones. They don't work the same way, so we have to, or we can, still manipulate these individually, the fingers. And then to reset, we can either click the reset button, or from the pose menu. So if we use that, reset, it resets everything. Or, let's see if we can undo that. Or, select all the bones, pose, clear transform, all. So as you can see, the reset button is much more convenient because we can't, let's just undo that. If nothing is selected, I don't think the clear transform works. No, so clear transform requires a selection, whereas reset pose will just reset everything regardless. It auto selects and then resets. And then to pose, what we want to enable is auto key, and this will insert a keyframe into the timeline, so we don't have to worry about inserting keys all the time. So we'll enable that, click, and let's just do a simple pose. So sliders at 1. Let's do marching on the spot. So that's G, R to rotate. G, R to rotate. And we can see as we're moving these control elements, it's dropping keyframes in. So that's frame 1. Let's go to frame 15. Flip that around so we can reset the pose. That'll insert a whole host of keyframes that are not necessarily needed, but that's frame 1. So we want to do the opposite. G, R, G, R. Check the elbows. That's the second frame. So we need to reset. So we don't want to use reset pose here. What we want to do, select the foot bone, pose, clear transform, all. And that'll reset that, but for this we do need to insert a keyframe. So add key. That should add the keyframe for that leg. Frame 15, frame 30. So for frame 30, we want to copy frame 1 to frame 30. So timeline slider, frame 1. From the pose menu, actually first what we want to do is select all. So selecting all the control elements, pose, copy pose, move the slider to frame 30, then from pose, paste pose. Like so. And what we can do is test the animation. So for that, we want to set the animation length to the same endpoint, which is 30. So click type 30. Then we can press the space bar, or we can use the timeline controls. We just press, and that is a very simple animation. That's going backwards, that's going forwards. And that is literally all we need to do to use the toolkit. And let's just save this file, save as. Going to be an avatar, going to put a toolkit live pose 1. Let's do an export for this. We have to save the file before we can export, so make sure you do that. File, save or save as. And then to export, we don't need to do what we used to do, which is file, export, FBX. We don't need to do that anymore if using the toolkit, if we're using a toolkit. Instead, we have this export tool option at the bottom. All we need to do is click the export button. So make sure our pose or the rig is selected, otherwise the button grays out, if I remember correctly. I used to do it, but so make sure the rig is selected and then just click the export button. And it'll do what it needs to do. Produce the FBX, which we can then import into Studio. So let's open Studio. Studio, create, and we want for this, well, we can use the avatar. So when you are creating your pose, you can use, now where is it? No, it's the base avatar. So PID, click, type 80, enter. So what people normally do is they click on the avatar. So select the avatar, derive, and you'll get the avatar. Now the problem with using this is that it already has some actions associated with it. So yes, there are advantages to using it and there are disadvantages, but for the sake of this process, if you use the avatar, whether it's the male or female avatar, you'll have all these actions. And you basically have to override the actions and the ensembles. So each one of these has to be updated with your imported animation and use the same settings. So if we click on the top one, after we haven't imported the file yet, but after we've imported, in the Asset tab, or in the Asset section, our animation will be listed. Oops. Animation will be listed, and we select it to replace the default, change the duration settings to whatever we need, replace, and then if we need, disable gaze at the bottom. But for the avatar, we have to replace, we have to do, well, not replace, we have to do that with all of them. Otherwise, as the action, which is stance.standing, as the action works and does its thing, if we only replace one of these, so if we replace the top one, it's still got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It's still got 9 sequences that it's going to play through randomly. So it'll play through each of these and maybe occasionally get to the replacement. So if you want the sequence that you're bringing in to replace or to be live, to be played whenever it's worn by the avatar, you have to replace all of these. Otherwise it'll not work the way that you expect it to. So I'm not going to do that because it's quite it's a bit of a laborious process to do. So instead, what we're going to do, just to show the import process, is create a new project, PID, oh look, all these PID, and then we're just going to derive from the base mood. Yeah, mood product. So that's 10,945,930. Enter. Empty mood. That's it. That's what we want. So just for the sake of this, we're going to derive from that. So new project. There's the avatar. And this doesn't have any actions. It's been stripped of all that information that's associated with the base avatars. So we have to import our FBX. So import FBX. Find the file, avatar, and what did we call it? Toolkit live pose. There it is, Toolkit live pose. So click on open. Open. It'll bring up the importer, and it's already given us a preview, so it's got one skeleton, one animation. So set up FBX. Ooh, this is background's transparent. Didn't do that before. So this is all okay. So we don't need to do anything there. Whoops. So that's okay. No meshes, that's fine. Next. No materials, that's fine. So next. It's found our animation, 30 frames. So review. It'll list our animation, file size, which may be important for particularly long animation sequences, so dance moves or things like that. Import. Brought in sequence. We could do with an overlay that says OK, or something that confirms that the file's been brought in, rather than it just being shown here, because otherwise there's no indication that there's a import success. So we've got our file, component, actions. So click on the plus, we need to create one. That's created our entry, and then we want to adjust its properties on the right here. So name trigger. So we want this to play as soon as it's worn. So stance.idle. it's case sensitive, so that's uppercase I. So we want to create our ensemble, which is where our animation will live. Plus, assets. So we click on the drop down. We should have our animation. There it is. So we created this at 30 frames. So duration, so start frame 1, end frame 30. We want this to loop infinitely, so that's 0. Replace, that's set. And then we can scroll down to the bottom, and if we want, we can enable disable gaze. And that stops the avatar's head from wandering all over the place. So let's just leave that for the moment. So apply, preview, and there we get the very simple animation that we created. But as you can see, with disable gaze, the avatar's head is still moving around. But that is our simple animation. Then of course, if you wanted to, now that you know that works, is what you can do is just set up a very basic sequence and export it to test that it's working, and then go back and re-edit it. So we've exported this. Now if we want to work on it again, all we need to do, and this is important because it messes up the scene if you don't do this, just make sure that the armature is selected. You'll be in object mode. So that's indicated because the control elements are orange. That indicates that you are in object mode. What we need to be is in pose mode. So make sure that you select the rig, and then up top here, switch to pose mode. This is important. Otherwise it messes the whole thing up. Done that a few times myself. So pose mode. And there we are. We can get back into editing our pose. So if we wanted to, let's say, let's press the R key. Let's just do something like this. So twist. So we want to copy that. Copy pose. Put that at frame 30. Paste pose. So that's inserted the keyframes for that. And then at frame 15, we want it the opposite way. So rotate. It's still got auto key enabled, so it's inserting the keys that we need. So what we have is an adjustment to our pose. So let's just save. Let's save as, just for clarity's sake. Don't need to do anything else. Again, make sure the rig is selected. Don't know if that actually makes a difference where we need to move the slider to frame 1 or not. And then all we need to do again is click the export button. But this time, I think it will override the, will it override? Just make sure. So save. So number 2, export. That's created the bits that we need. Back in Studio. Let's create another one. New project. PID 10,945,930. Empty mood. Derive. There's the avatar. Import. FBX. Hey hero. Aha, so if you don't if you make adjustments to the pose and save over the project that you were working on, it will export over the top of the previous export. Oh, thanks, Hero. That's hey Cho. What was I saying? Oh yes, so if you make adjustments to your animations and you want to keep the older versions, make sure that you are version saving. So when you save your files, it's 1, 2, 3, 4 or whatever. And that way, when you export, you'll get another version or another iteration of the animation, so you can go back and forth between the versions to check things to make sure that they're working. So that's just a good habit to get into. So as you make major changes, just save a different version of the file so that you don't override or overwrite the older versions. So back into Studio, number 2, open. Oh, it does do it now. Previously, on Beverly Hills 90210, we got a solid grey background, but we can now see, never noticed that before, we can now see the background. So that's the preview. Set up FBX. Don't need to do anything here, so that's all right. Next, that's okay, no materials. Next, got our animation. Review. There's our animation. Yeah, we could do with a confirmation message popping up rather than it just loading into the assets. But anyway, it's loaded it in. Whoops. Component. Actions. New action. There's our action, so we're going to change all of this. So again, stance.idle, uppercase I. Create our ensemble where the animation will live. Assets, there's our sequence. Same again, 1, 30, loops 0 for infinite, replace. And let's disable gaze this time so we can see the difference. Apply, preview. There's our sequence with the modification. And so we can see our head is configure. So let's disable disable gaze. Preview. And her head doesn't quite look so rigid because she's blinking, but if there was someone else in the room, she'd be able to look at that other person. But what we can do here is play around with the speed. So that's the Steve Austin slow-mo bionic man or woman. Let's go 150, no, 200. So you can play around with the speed. And we can see that it's a percentage. But one thing you want to be mindful of is that the base rate 100, that works at 30 frames per second. So even though in Blender we can set the FPS, don't necessarily need to, because all you need to do is pay attention to the duration or the length of your sequence and make sure that it is appropriate to the number of frames per second that IMVU uses. So as we say, it's 30 seconds. So this animation that we created will last for 1 second. So if you were wanting to do something that was relatively precise, just keep in mind the FPS, that's 30. I think Blender's default is 24. Yeah, it's the default is 24, but it's set for the purposes of the tool at 30, which is brilliant. That matches the IMVU. So that want to do some more editing to this, so we'd switch to pose mode, make sure the rig is selected, and away we go. So if you find it tricky to manipulate the control elements, so that's these shapes again, if you find it tricky to manipulate those and they're going all over the place, although you can use the G key and the R key, so G is free translate or free move, it moves the whatever is selected freely in all axes depending on what the object is, and R does the same thing but for rotate. Depending on what the object is, it'll move freely. So if you find that tricky to do, what you can do is use the widgets. And for poses, we only use translate or move and rotate. Don't use scale. That's a no-no. And that will give us widgets that we can use. Has that popped in a... Where is that? There it is. So that's popped in keyframe. So again, we want to copy that. Just that move. Pose. Copy pose. So we're doing this because we need to make sure that the front and back of the animation, so that's frame 1 and frame 30, are identical so we don't get hiccups as the animation repeats itself. Pose, paste. Because if we didn't, we'd get this. So let's just undo that, if it will. So frame 30 is as is. Frame 1 is the one that's adjusted. So if we play this, we'll get that. Can we see this? The avatar snaps to at frame 30 as it repeats, as it goes across the yes, seamless. Yes, seamless, like seamless textures. Same sort of principle. So what we have to do is make sure that we're copying whatever we do at frame 1 to frame 30 or vice versa. Or vice versa, or however you pronounce that. So copy, paste, and it's dropped in and overridden the keyframe that was there, which is good. So if we play this now, so we don't get that snap. So press the space bar and that just stops us, funnily enough, where we need to be. Space bar. Ooh la la. And that's all we need to do. So this is just for an animated pose, but it'd be the same principle for a static pose. So let's straighten the head a little bit. Again, copy that. Copy. Frame 30. Paste. Frame 15. We need to do the opposite, but we only need to do that once because it's not repeated. And that is our silly sequence. But we can keep doing this. So we're at frame 30. We've manipulated the foot bone. So we want to copy that to frame 1. Copy. See. Paste. And then frame 15, do something similar. Yes, treadmill. So what we end up with, press the space bar, is just a very silly oh yes, one of those step machines. Hey Maisie. And that's all poses or animations are, is just they're so much easier to do now. So literally there is no excuse for not doing them. And it is literally now just the question of selecting these primary elements that control whole sections of, so this is the leg. This one at the foot controls the entire leg. The one at the hand controls the entire arm. Then we've got the elbow controls, which control the chicken wings. Then we've got shoulder rotation bones or control elements. So let's copy that. Frame 30. Paste. So we need to reset that one. And again, because we've selected an individual component, we should or could use or can use clear transform all, and that will just make sure that that's reset back to its defaults, rather than, as we were saying at the beginning, using reset pose, because that will reset everything. So that one, move that up. Let's move that down. So because we moved that one at frame 15, it still keeps its pose or position when we go to frame 1. So make sure that's selected, pose, clear transform all, and that just resets it. Double check that's the same at frame 30. So let's drop that down a little bit. Copy. Paste. And then play. So we end up with a breathing animation, Azumi, is basically the same thing, but so let's just save this, save as number 3. Again, remember iterations. So let's create a new sequence. So we've been working on one, so all we need to do is new, general, just reset the project or reset Blender. So we're back to the beginning. So that's all we've got in the scene. Don't do anything else. View, sidebar, IMVU Toolkit. And again, we want the animation tool. Append animation file. So that's all we need to do. We don't need to do anything to the scene. We just click the buttons and the toolkit will do the thing it needs to do for us. So for a breathing animation, we don't have chest bones per se. So what we have to do is use, so for this we're going to use the rotate to get precise movement. You need to make sure that auto key is enabled. So everything else is okay. And then for the chest bone, or to breathe, we are just manipulating these upper elements of the skeleton or the rig in order to create that impression. So what we want to do first, though, let's just undo that, is insert keyframe for these three bones or these three control elements. So torso is telling us what the names of the things are. Look, torso 3, torso 2. So we don't have any specific sort of like midriff, you know, stomach or whatever it is. So shift click these three and then add a key. Click the add key button. That'll add 3 of those and that'll create our base pose. So what we can then do, move to frame 30, do the same thing again, add key. So these set our start end point. So this is the loop. And then in the middle, frame 15, we can then, so we're using the rotate tool, we can then rotate these how we might want to change the position of the avatar so that it looks like might be breathing. So for the head, because that's just inserted a keyframe on its own and we don't have one here and here, we might have to reset that at those frames. The frame 1, because what it's doing, as the pose resets, because it's carrying pose data from frame 15, it makes the head drop forward. So make sure that's selected, pose, clear transform, all. That'll reset it, and in doing so it's dropped in a pose. So we can now copy that, copy, frame 30, paste, and then if we play our sequence we have to set the animation length. So click type 30 and then just play. So press the space bar or again use the tools at the bottom here. Now we have a rather odd breathing animation which makes it look like she's hyperventilating. But that's all you do. That's all you'd need to do for a breathing animation. Although that does look a little odd. I mean, is that what, boob twerking? Yeah, that'll be boob twerking. Whoops, don't want to need a close-up of that. So we'll save that, stop the sequence. Save as, what do we call the other one? Toolkit Live. Okay, so Toolkit Live Boob 1. Save as. So that would be your breathing animation. The important bit really is to keep in mind the start and end frames. As long as those are the same, whatever you do in here doesn't really matter because it will automatically loop. But what we can also do is you don't necessarily need to have a midpoint set at the midpoint. What we can do here is we're going to use an alt click and that will select the entire frame, all the keyframes at this particular, all the marked channels. These are channels at this particular keyframe. So we're doing essentially a loop select. So we can click on one of these, press the G key, and we can move these. Click to set, and then if we play this, get a completely different type of animation. So you can play with the positioning of your frames to change the characteristics of the sequence. Yes, that's hyperventilating. Let's play that backwards. Yeah, that's definitely boob twerking. But you can see it's relatively simple. It's quite straightforward. It's just a question of making sure that your first and last frames are identical so that it loops correctly. But we'll call it quits there because this was only meant to be a quick stream just to make sure that everything was working. May do more of these, especially with these poses, because that's the thing that a lot of people struggle with, particularly now that the Flash player is no longer available. So if you have any suggestions or things that you want to see, just message JazzCat on IMVU or join this Discord server, which is, if you go to the whatever channel you are watching this on, the profile, it'll be in there, or just wait for the next stream whenever that comes out. Let's save that. I might make these files available just for so you can mess around with them. Save. Awesome. Right, so yeah, we'll call it quits there, and look out for some more of these, particularly with this animation thing, like we say, because excellent. Yeah, bookmark. Yeah, bookmark it. There are some tutorial. There is a. Let me just. Where did I put that? So if you want to know more about the toolkit, there are more formal tutorials at this link. Just bookmark that, and it's being updated as and when with more formal tutorials about the various elements of the toolkit. We've done furniture already. We've done attachment. We've done some on animation, but animation is always something that you can do something with. Not done clothing yet, and we've not done rooms yet because those are quite complicated items to make under normal circumstances. So have to do a bit more work with these two to get some tutorials, more formal tutorials for those, but they are in the works. So thanks for lurking, lurkers. Thanks for watching Azami. What was the other one? Hero. And there was somebody else. Maisie. Don't know how you pronounce that. Oh, and Venom. Hello, Venom. And we shall see you on the next one. So bookmark and follow and all the stuff that you usually have to do with these things. And we shall see you on the next stream. So bye for now.